Hello and welcome. Today I'd like to chat a little bit about The Shaking of the Foundations by Paul Tillich. This is the most recent book that I finished, and following this chat, as I've been doing on my last few videos, I will also touch base on what I'm currently reading, as well as chat a bit about what my next planned read is going to be. But yeah, The Shaking of the Foundations by Paul Tillich. So this was originally published in 1948, and I'm not sure what year this edition that I read. I bought this used, but the title, the copyright page just gives the copyright date of 1948 and doesn't give any other publication history. Although I know this edition has to be after 1965 because it lists his date of death here, 1965. This is published by the Scribner Library Lyceum Editions. So Charles Scribner's and Sons, New York. I became aware of Paul Tillich back in my college days. Actually, I went to a small liberal arts college that was Methodist oriented and had a lot of students that were actually pre-theology students. I was not. I studied history, but in liberal arts, colleges, you have to take a lot of different classes. And so part of what we were required to take were religion classes and philosophy classes. And so the religion class that I took it wound up being one of the religion classes I took wound up having readings by Paul Tillich, not really this particular The Shaking of the Foundations book, but just other readings. The primary text was this one, The Liberation of Life by Charles Birch and John Cobb. This is not the edition that I had. I no longer have the edition that we read, but this book was one of those books that, I read as a young person that literally changed my entire worldview, really. And so, in preparation for this chat, I was looking for this, a picture of it, since I no longer own it, and I saw that this was out of print now. So I guess that's showing my age, that something I read in college is already out of print. But yeah, so Paul Tillich, what this liberation of life is, I just pulled up the description of it. This book is about the liberation of the concept of life from the bondage fashioned by the interpreters of life ever since biology began, and about the liberation of the life of humans and non-humans alike from the bondage of social structures and behaviors, which now threatens the fullness of life's possibilities, if not survival itself, etc., etc., etc. For the first time, it brings together in one work the insights of modern biology with those of modern holistic philosophy and a liberal theology in a way which challenges conventional approaches to science, agriculture, sociology, politics, economics, development, and liberation movements. So yeah, this book was just so, when I read it or studied it back in college, it just was so interesting and so really changed my point of view and my worldview in so many ways. I remember going home one time and talking about this book to my somewhat religiously conservative Baptist parents, and they were like, "What are you learning at that college?" Oh, yeah. But anyway, I had not read Paul Tillich since, actually. So then it happened that Richardson Reads, the channel, booktuber Richardson Reads, has been doing some shelf tours, and he had a shelf of theologians and theology books, and Paul Tillich was mentioned there. And then fairly recently, the Neil Griffiths channel Neil Griffiths had a video about theology, and this book was particularly mentioned in that video. And so after that video, I thought, you know what, I'm going to order it and read it, read some Paul Tillich. Again, because, back in my college days, it had been so sort of meaningful for me. And so, I ordered the book. It turned out to be really fortuitous because immediately prior to this, I read Night by Elie Wiesel, which was a Holocaust memoir. And so this Shaking of the Foundations here the title here refers to, these were published in 1958, is talking about the war that the world had just gone through. And so, the foundations of the earth had been shook, according to him, during that war. And so, Anyway, that's why I sort of decided to pick it up and read it. But what it's about, it's actually 22 sermons. And, don't get put off by the term sermons. I get it. That word among many people that I know has a very negative connotation. But these are sermons in that they're structured, rather than essays, they're structured like a sermon. So it starts out with the scripture, and then it has, a meditation or an essay about that topic that scripture pertains to. And so there are 22 of them. 22 on all different sorts of topics. The very first one is the shaking of the foundations, where he talks about how the world goes through these periodic shakings where its foundations are shaken, and then there's a necessary to rebuild, and the old passes away and something new is born. And that's always a time of danger. And he's talking about here and specifically the danger of atomic weapons, which got used at the end of World War II. There's a danger then when the new world is built, when the old world is destroyed, that now there's this danger where the whole world could be destroyed basically forever. But they're on all sorts of topics, really. And to me, they were just, I take my wisdom where I can get it. So it's I don't think you need to be immersed in Christianity to be able to take away, really insightful ideas and really deep meanings from these, sermons. So that was my experience reading them anyway. I was just going to call out, for the purpose of the chat, just call out a few of them. One of them, chapter 7, is called The Depth of Existence, and this sermon is talking about depth. Like when we say something is deep, like, that movie was deep, or, that book was really deep. That's something, that word carries a meaning. It's something it's something transcendent when we're saying deep. That means it's touching something different than our everyday world. And so that sermon is sort of a discussion of deep, depth, what and what that means to us, as far as humans. And then number 8 was on the transitoriness of life. And this one was about the transitory nature of all life, of course, but really more than life, really the transitory nature of the material world, which includes things that aren't living, like the Earth itself, our solar system, the galaxy, the universe, even perhaps, it's a finite thing. It will not always exist. Our sun will not always exist. We certainly will not always exist. We live in a very short time frame, really, compared to the galaxy or the universe. But nevertheless, all things material passes away, as opposed to, he says, as opposed to the divine, which is eternal. And the divine is something that I think a lot of these sermons sort of seeks to maybe shed light on, because the divine is something deep, right? It's something that's hidden. We might not be able to really formulate even what we think of as divine into words. It's one of those things that we don't know exactly how to define it, but we know it when we feel it. Even people who aren't religious, have some sorts of feelings of the divine. Like poetry can do this. It can take you. It's a transcendent. It can take you to a different. It can transcend your sort of everyday existence. So yeah, I love that essay. Then the 16 is called "The Witness of the Spirit to the Spirit." And this was all about spirit. And what we mean when we say spirit. And there's just a kind of a cool quote I thought I would read from this one. Just also, this will give you an idea sort of what the sermons sound like. And he says, the word spirit has largely disappeared from our daily language and entirely from our scientific terminology. It is replaced by reason. But reason argues about what it has received. It analyzes life and often kills life. It is not life itself. It is without creative power. But the Spirit is power as well as reason, uniting and transcending them. It is creative life. Neither power alone nor reason alone creates the works of art and poetry, of philosophy and politics. The Spirit creates them individually and universally, powerful and full of reason at the same time. So yeah, just explore this idea of, what is spirit, what is spiritual. I love that sermon. The 18th one is called Waiting, and that's about the importance of waiting. There was a quote from this too. I'm going to run out of time if I'm not careful. It says, but although waiting is not having, it is also having. The fact that we wait for something shows that in some way we already possess it. Waiting anticipates that which is not yet real. If we wait in hope and patience, the power of that for which we wait is already effective within us. Just love it. Each of these sermons is just a couple of 3 or 4 pages at the most. There for the general audience. There is one that's for theologians. That's a little bit longer. It's in 3 parts, but it's only maybe like 8 or 10 pages. I didn't say that going into the chat, but yeah, it's very accessible. It's meant for the everyday people, not necessarily for theologians. Sermon number 19 is called You Are Accepted. This is the one that was referred to in Neil Griffiths' video. And this is all about sin and grace, and sin being a state of separation from other people, from society, from the divine, and grace means a connection to yourself, connection to other people, connection to society, and connection to divine. That's living in a state of grace, and you can't live in that all the time because we're material beings, so we live in a state of separation, but we do get those moments where we feel grace, where we feel connected, and so at that point, that's when we're in grace, according to this sermon. So I thought that was just beautiful. And finally, I loved number 22, the very last one. It's called Behold, I am doing a new thing. I love that line. I need to use that sometime. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. I'm going to use that the next time I change something on my channel. This one's all about changing something new, like growth. How when you grow, like for cells, if cells just continue to grow and they don't stop, that's cancer. But what cells do is they differentiate. As they grow, they make choices about what they're going to become, and then that limits then their freedom. So when you're young, you have a lot of freedom because you haven't made a lot of these choices yet, which led you down a certain path. But by the time you're older, then this has started to be the case, and this is the way life is and the way it should be, he argues. So I love that one. That one, I'm probably not doing that one justice in this chat, but that was actually, I think, my favorite one because it pertains to aging, and that's something I'm concerned with is, figuring out, trying to age well. All right, well, I'll stop the chat at that. I really love the fact that I read this. I'm going to try to get a used copy of The Liberation of Life and get that reread this December, I think. So that's on my to-do list. So what I'm currently reading now, let me just pull it up real quick, if I can find it. Of course, it's electronically, and so it's the time that it wants to be slow is whenever I want it to be fast. I am reading Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This is turning out to be really good. I'm about 20% in. It's about Lincoln's son Willie dies, and it takes place in a cemetery with Willie's spirit and Lincoln going to visit him, along with a lot of other spirits that inhabit this cemetery. It's written in an unusual way, and I'll describe it more when I do the chat. But once I got used to kind of who was who and how the discussion was taking place, then I've kind of now adopted that rhythm of reading, and so it's moving along pretty quickly, and I really do like it. My next read is planned to be Hard to Be a God by the Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. This is the Soviet era. This was originally published in 1964, Soviet era science fiction, originally published in Russian. This is a new edition from, I think, 2014, translated by Olena Bormashenko, who did the translation of Roadside Picnic, which was by the Strugatsky brothers, and I read last year. So I'm going to do a buddy read with Richardson Reads, we're going to read this as a buddy read. That will be coming up after I finish Lincoln and the Bardo, and after Mark at Richardson Reads gets his copy of Hard to Be a God. If I finish Lincoln and the Bardo before Mark gets his copy for our buddy read, I do have the newest edition of Poetry Magazine and the New Yorker, so I'll just be doing some side reading, getting ready for that buddy read. So I will stop at that. Until next time, take care. Bye.